इंटरनेशनल सोशल मीडिया पटेल प्रहलाद भाई.
4,000 crores in 23-24. What happened in 24-25? The government reduced this to 2,500 crores for UGC. So from 5,400 crores, you reduced it to 2,500 crores. Sorry, in 23-24, higher education was 57,000 crores. You reduced it to 47,000 crores. Now, what did you do this year? We had the finance minister stand up and say, I have increased the UGC's money to 3,300 crores. But madam, you reduced it from 5,400 to 2,800. Now you're increasing it to 3,300 and you expect us to be happy? You reduced it from 57,000 to 44,000 in 24-25. Now you've increased it to 47,000 and you're asking us to be happy? We should be comparing it to what the numbers in 23-24 for. We must be the only developing country which is cutting its access and it's cutting its education budget. Look at the trend. It's a very dangerous trend. It's something we must be aware of. We have the finance minister saying that we are giving 10 lakh loans per year for students, but the average medical college, the average engineering private college is charging much more than 10 lakhs. So you are getting into a debt trap to study at a place which is giving you an education which may not be a quality education. Until 1976, education was a state subject. Then we had the 42nd Constitutional Amendment, which made education and put it on the concurrent list. But what do we have today? We have a constant weakening of the federal structure. If you look at the new UGC draft regulations which have just come up, what does it do? You've placed something on the concurrent list. What does it mean? It means that the state and the union must sit together and decide. What does the UGC draft regulations talk about? All of you must be aware of this. A couple of very dramatic changes and very dangerous changes. If you look at state-aided universities means that the state is paying for the university. They are giving the land. They are paying the faculty salaries. The vice-chancellor selection committee to choose the vice chancellor will have no representative for the state government. State is going to give the land, state is going to set up the university, state is going to pay salaries, and selection of the vice chancellor, there is going to be no representative from the state. How does this work? Second is the process of selection of the vice chancellor. All of us in India, coming from the background, at least in Bengal, in Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, education, person doesn't care about wealth, person cares about education. Saraswati is held higher than most other gods in the pantheon. Now, in that country, if you think about it, that when we are talking about a vice chancellor, you cannot just have an administrator as a vice chancellor. In many hospitals now, you have an ex-major, a retired colonel, who's the administrator. He's not a medical doctor. You can manage a hospital like that, but you can't manage a university by a non-academician. What are you trying to do? You are saying that we are opening up the vice chancellor position to anybody from lateral hire. So you could be working in a corporate, you could be in the IS, you could be anything, you can come and become a vice chancellor. This is severely diluting it. The third thing is an inquiry committee. Even in an inquiry committee, you're not putting anybody from the state government. So when you talk about higher education, all you're doing is diluting the role of the states. And this is a very dangerous thing going forward. And the state of Tamil Nadu, the state of Bengal, all our state governments have reacted very strongly to this. And I urge the faculty and the students here to be aware of this and to make sure that you register your protest at the appropriate forum. It is extremely important for all of us. This is not my problem alone. This is not Derek's problem alone. This problem is so big that all of you have to make sure that the protest is registered at the right time and the right place.
I am so proud that everything goes wrong, whether justice or financial contribution or equality or inclusivity, everything is wrong now. But our voices seem not to be heard. Right from the installation of new national educational policy, I had been part of till coming up to Delhi, and we have mobilized all over Tamil Nadu, but voices were not heard. Now also with the recent UGC draft, the whole Tamil Nadu is being mobilized and people are voicing out. I wonder whether it will be heard. So even to an extent, we wonder whether we are in a democratic country. And do you think something would happen with all the...
Sister, you're asking the same question.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, just now.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yes.
It's okay. Yeah,
For the younger generation, it doesn't give any motivation or anything to.
Remember something, ma'am. If our founding fathers and if Gandhiji had thought that we are never going to get, is at any point, then we would never have got independence. We are all part of a movement. It's not something that's overnight. And yes, we have seen changes. In my lifetime, I have seen that if you stick to the path and dissent, voices are heard. Maybe they're not being heard by those in power, but people who put people in power are the common people. And if common people see movement, they will understand sooner or later. They are mobilized by movement. And don't forget, the power doesn't lie in Delhi. The power lies in the average voter's thumb, which he presses in the EVM. So if average people are understanding and average people are convinced of the right or wrong of a certain movement, then over time, of course, something will happen. A lot has already happened and more will happen. The fact that we are standing here today and being able to speak in this environment shows that they have not succeeded.
So straight away we will start, because as I said, we have 2 bombs today. I have to explode them with a controlled observation. Now we have another firebrand Mahua, Moitra. In Bengali it's not Moitra, it's Moitro. Am I right? Yes. Perfect. And initially started as an investment banker, London and other places, but he entered politics. But he became very famous when she talked about the early signs of fascism. That was the time he spoke in the parliament about how the democracy functions. And her work from the business to politics, now she means really business in politics. In that way, we are very happy to have you with us, with a remarkable force in Indian politics, particularly a woman who can speak to the truth, to the power. And today, she is going to share with us in continuation of the same fire. We will continue to have fire on how this excellence and access can go together. Over to you. We will honor at the end at the end. No, we are keeping the tempo, not to lose rituals. We will honor you at the end, depending upon the quality of your speech.
I hope I will match up. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be present here today, addressing this August gathering of faculty and students at the centenary celebrations of the Loyola College. It was set up by Francis Bertram over 100 years ago, and today ranks as one of the premier colleges of India. The name of the college, of course, is derived from the great Basque priest and theologian Ignatius of Loyola. And he set up the Society of Jesus, was its first superior general, and he envisaged, in addition to other Catholic vows, that the purpose of the Society of Jesus,
Dr. says 10.
was to go forth and set up institutions and to teach. This was one of the founding principles of his society. When Juan de Vega, who was the ambassador of the Holy Roman Emperor in Rome, met St. Ignatius of Loyola in Rome, he was so impressed with him. He invited him to come to Sicily with him, where he was viceroy. And so Ignatius traveled to Sicily with him, and that's how the first college, the first Jesuit college, was set up in Messina. And then St. Ignatius, of course, sent his people all over. 1540, 142 is when St. Francis Xavier, as his emissary, arrived in India. Now, the Jesuits, even today, believe in the motto of perinde ac cadaver, which means that as in a dead body, which means that a Jesuit should be as empty of ego as a corpse. We should have no ego. We should let go. Perinte Aleva. And I come from Bengal, and Rabindranath Tagore, in his poem, his song, Prano Bhoriye, wrote exactly the same thing. More army dube jak nebe, which means that the army, the ego, should be drowned in all of us. It's exactly the same principle. And today, Loyola College, in action and spirit, embodies magis, which in Latin means more. And it means that you're always striving to be more, always striving to do more, and that is the principle that's taking you forward. You're constantly breaking, you're not resting on your laurels, you're constantly trying to break new ground in accessible technologies for spreading higher learning. Today you've asked me to speak on the inclusivity and diversity of higher learning and higher education in India. So, in short, have we succeeded in making higher learning accessible to all sections of society? Have we succeeded in making it accessible to male and female, to rich and poor, to all castes, to all geographies, which means can a person sitting in the northeast of India have the same access to education and higher learning as somebody sitting in the 4 metros or the 8 metros of India today? And if we haven't done that so far, we've been an independent country for 75 years, the first national education policy was out in 1968. If we haven't managed to do it, what do we need to change to make sure that we fix the problem and we fix it quickly? Now, as students, as faculty, as alumni of institutions as exalted as Loyola, I myself am a product of Mount Holyoke, which is also a very elite institution. We have to first realize how very privileged we are to be even sitting here. I am the principal of a governing body in Karimpur, my old MLA constituency. And when I just look at that college and I look at Loyola, it could be in 2 different countries, it could be in 2 different planets. We have to understand that. It could be in 2 different planets. So the first thing to realize is that how privileged we are to be even present here. And a majority of these opportunities are shut to a very large portion of our population even today. So this process of social reproduction, where if you're born into a specific socio group, you continue to live there, nowhere is this as prevalent as in higher education. So we say if you're born poor, the chances are that you'll be poor and the chances are that you'll die poor. So similarly in higher education, if you come from a family where somebody has gone to college, the chances are much greater that you'll go to college or enroll in higher learning. And if you don't, then you don't. So it's kind of perpetuating. So this is the issue in India today, where the likelihood of anyone enrolling in higher education is significantly influenced by the social economic status. So students from poorer backgrounds have absolutely no access to higher education. If you look at I'm a student of economics and we studied John Rawls, and John Rawls was one of the greatest American political theologians, political theorists, and he had this theory of justice, which he propounded in 1971. And it's very simple, this theory of justice. The theory of justice is fairness. I got the last bit of Derek's speech, and Derek said the main thing that we have to be standing up for is justice. Justice is not something esoteric. If something doesn't feel right, then chances are it's not right. So if it doesn't feel right, that just because you are a product of a higher economic background, that you have access to college, and a poor child who could be as bright, there's something that doesn't feel right. So he said that the theory was designed, Rawls's theory was designed to achieve the greatest benefit for the greatest number. That is how we reach optimal results in society, greatest theory for the greatest number. And the end goal should be equality of opportunity, not inequality of outcome. So we must make sure that everyone has access to college. We don't have to concentrate on whether everyone is going to go ahead and use that college education to go and do something else. Equality of opportunity is the main obstacle and the main goal of higher learning. And I think that's where India, even after 3 NEPs, has not really managed to crack it. Broadly, there are 2 parameters for higher education for any country, and that's how much of your GDP are you spending on higher education, on education, and the second is what is your gross enrollment ratio, which is between 18 and 23-year-olds, how many students are enrolled in higher education after class 12. Now, if you look at India, in 1966, we had the Kothari Commission. The Kothari Commission said that 6% is the number where we must spend a minimum of 6% of our GDP on education. Out of that, what should we spend on higher education should be between 1.5% to 2%. Where is India today? India is spending between 4 and 4.2% on, so we haven't cracked it. What's the second parameter? Second parameter that the NEP, National Education Policy of 2020 lays down also is by 2035, we must have a 50% gross enrollment ratio, which in higher education, which means that 50% of all students after class 12 must go into college. Where are we today? 28.3% in the last study, which was 2022. Today, we are probably somewhere near 31, 32%. We keep talking about China. Do you know what China's GER is? 70%. 7 in 10 students are going into higher learning in China, whereas 3 out of 10 are going in India. That's how skewed the metrics are. Now, we talk about, we've got, India's got the third largest world education system. How do we measure this? What is third largest? It is number of students at universities and colleges. So India has 50,000 colleges, okay. But compared to our population, that's not very much. We can't just look at the number of colleges. It's got 1,200 universities. But if you look at the US has got 4,000 universities. If you look at China, China's got about 2,800 universities. So India may be the third largest in terms of sheer number, but in terms of penetration, we've still got a very, very, very long way to go. Now, India's GDP today is about $2,200, $2,300. We are hoping by 2035 to move to $4,300. If we are to do this for any kind of human capital development, higher education is the key that we have to unlock. If we are failing in higher education, there is no way that we can create enough human capital to reach this by 2035. It is, forget about the trillion economy, it will not happen. Higher education is the key. Now, anywhere that the right to education, we talk of the right to education. Unfortunately, the right to education in India, in our thought, in our policy, in everything, has been limited to the right to primary education. Now, the right to permanent education is what we should be thinking about. So the right to permanent education, accessibility to online education, accessibility to tools which give you online education no matter where you are in the country, that's the more fundamental right that we have to go thinking forward. It's not just primary education. All education is not just primary education. When we look at the All India survey on higher education, India also suffers from a big problem with data. We have administrative data and we have survey data. In survey data, the last census was done in 2011. The NSSO survey data is completely unreliable and not yet out. So all we have is the Ministry of Human Resource and Development, the Ministry of Education, which puts out this All India survey. The last was in 2022. Now we look at that, and that's how all the kind of numbers that we are getting is kind of also quite skewed. If we look at with respect to enrollment in tertiary education, India is 129th out of 146. 129th. When we look at there's something called the Sustainable Development Goals, which is endorsed by the United Nations. 193 countries have signed up. India has also signed up. The SDG 4 is what we call it. It says by 2030, we have to have equal access for all men and women. Affordable and quality technical, vocational, tertiary education should be made available. Now, India is going to miss the SDG target by a long way. We do not have equal access to high quality education for men and women. It is still elusive in India. Until 1976, education was a state subject. Then we had the 42nd Constitutional Amendment, which made education and put it on the concurrent list. But what do we have today? We have a constant weakening of the federal structure. If you look at the new UGC draft regulations which have just come up, what does it do? You've placed something on the concurrent list. What does it mean? It means that the state and the union must sit together and decide. What does the UGC draft regulations talk about? All of you must be aware of this. A couple of very dramatic changes and very dangerous changes. If you look at state-aided universities State-aided universities means that the state is paying for the university. They are giving the land. They are paying the faculty salaries. The vice-chancellor selection committee to choose the vice-chancellor will have no representative for the state government. State is going to give the land, state is going to set up the university, state is going to pay salaries, and selection of the vice-chancellor, there is going to be no representative from the state. How does this work? Second is the process of selection of the vice-chancellor. Now, all of us in India, coming from the backgrounds, at least in Bengal, in Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, education, person doesn't care about wealth, person cares about education. Saraswati is held higher than most other gods in the pantheon. Now, in that country, if you think about it, that when we are talking about a vice-chancellor, you cannot just have an administrator as a vice-chancellor. In many hospitals now, you have an ex-major, a retired colonel, who's the administrator. He's not a medical doctor. You can manage a hospital like that, but you can't manage a university by a non-academician. What are you trying to do? You are saying that we are opening up the vice-chancellor position to anybody from lateral hire. So you could be working in a corporate, you could be in the IS, you could be anything, you can come and become a vice-chancellor. This is severely diluting it. The third thing is an inquiry committee. Even in an inquiry committee, you're not putting anybody from the state government. So when you talk about higher education, all you're doing is diluting the role of the states. And this is a very dangerous thing going forward. And the state of Tamil Nadu, the state of Bengal, all our state governments have reacted very strongly to this. And I urge the faculty and the students here to be aware of this and to make sure that you register your protest at the appropriate forum. It is extremely important for all of us. This is not my problem alone. This is not Derek's problem alone. This problem is so big that all of you have to make sure that the protest is registered at the right time and the right place. Now, when we think about the NEPs, the 3 NEPs that have come, and we think about the UGC which was set up, we think about centralized funding. Only 1/4 of funding comes from the center. 3/4 come from the state. Only 30% is planned expenditure, 70% is non-planned, which means 70% of all expenditure goes into things like maintenance and admin and all of that. Now, this itself is a skewed number which we need to change. This is also very important, which is hitting back on. When we talk about India and we talk about the world rankings, there are only probably 2 or 3 which make it to the top 100 universities. When you look at funding, the funding to universities like the IITs, not to say that we should cut away, to IIT, Jawaharlal Nehru University, all of those have increased, but the funding similarly to rural, to make it more accessible for rural and backward areas, education has not been cut. There is also something else that I need to point out to you, which was quite funny. When you looked at the budget, and this is something when we say play with numbers, I'm sorry, I'm an economics and math major, I'm going to bore you a little with numbers because numbers talk to me. So I can see a lot of bored faces, please bear with me because numbers tell stories that other people can't tell. When we looked at the union budget for 23-24, the budget for the UGC was 5,360 crores, 5,400 crores, and the budget for higher education was 44,000 crores. Okay, in 23-24, what happened in 24-25? The government reduced this to 2,500 crores for UGC. So from 5,400 crores, you reduced it to 2,500 crores. And in higher education, you reduced it from in 23-24, higher education was 57,000 crores. You reduced it to 47,000 crores. Now what did you do this year? We had the finance minister stand up and say, I have increased the UGC's money to 3,300 crores. But madam, you reduced it from 5,400 to 2,800. Now you're increasing it to 3,300 and you expect us to be happy? You reduced it from 57,000 to 44,000 in 24-25. Now you've increased it to 47,000 and you're asking us to be happy? We should be comparing it to what the numbers in 23-24 were. We must be the only developing country which is cutting its access and it's cutting its education budget. Look at the trend. It's a very dangerous trend. It's something we must be aware of. When we look at world-class institutions, which is the 10 public funded universities, we are selecting 10 and we are giving them 1,800 crores. But other institutions are struggling for routine expenditure. You can't just give 1,800 crores, which is over 10% of your 20% of your budget to 10 institutions. What happens to the rest? So this is also something that we need to think about. The overall spending is, when we compare 6%, we are between 4.5 to 4.2 to 4.6%. When we look at the US is giving 6% of its GDP to spending. We look at China is giving 6.2%. When we look at Germany is giving 4.6%, Japan 7.5%. So why is India, that needs to really reach its goal, still spending only 4.3%? When we look at higher education, this is where we are falling very, very short. The public expenditure on higher education in India is only 0.6% of GDP. Total education is 4.6. Higher education, that is colleges and universities, is only 0.6. Compare that to the US, 2.4. Compare that to China, over 2%. Again, we are falling short. When we look at what other countries have done over the last few years in this, let me just look at some numbers. Let's look at the G20 numbers. The global gross enrollment ratio in the G20 countries is about 42%. China has improved its GER by 20 times in the last 3 decades. 20 times. The gross enrollment ratio has increased by more than 50% in 17 of the G20 countries, but not for us. And if you look at the gender parity, when we're talking about inclusivity, we're talking of diversity, let's look at gender parity. Gender gap was as high as 11% in 11-12, and that's declined. But it's during COVID, what we saw was, again, women fell out of the workforce, women fell out of higher education, backward castes and SC/STs completely reversed all their gains in the years leading up to COVID. So just 2 years of something like COVID, of a black swan event, can put back decades, which really shows that if you have situations like COVID, that the SC/STs, that other backward castes, women who traditionally have been the laggards, have completely lost access to higher education. This is something which has been very scary with migration, with the digital divide. Another thing that we see in India is that there's a large growth of private universities, private aided, unaided colleges, and they've got a much higher share of student enrollment. Two things we need to worry about here is what is the quality of education being imparted by these colleges. I'm not talking about Loyola, I'm talking about all these tiny colleges that have mushroomed all over India. All over India. What is the quality of education, and also what is the cost of this education? We have the finance minister saying that we are giving 10 lakh loans per year for students, but the average medical college, the average engineering private college is charging much more than 10 lakhs. So you are getting into a debt trap to study at a place which is giving you an education which may not be a quality education. That's another issue which is coming up. Another number that I was looking at was, if you look at geographies and you look across states, and so when we look at the states, and you look at men and you look at women with higher education, Chandigarh, Pondicherry, UTs have 43%, 34%. But if you look at the larger states, Uttar Pradesh, only 15% of men have higher education. In Uttar Pradesh, you've got 10% of women with higher education. Madhya Pradesh, 13% of men with higher education. 8% of women with higher education. So there again, the difference in geography is completely skewed. We are not having access across states. Geography plays a very important part. Where you live in India plays a part in what access to higher education you have. That's also another thing. The average in India is still very low. The average is about 19% for men and 13% for women. And when we are going forward and we are thinking about how do we include more people and how do we make this more diverse, one of the biggest problems, India is, like we say, a big family. But as most of us who are not perhaps born in the higher strata know, this is a family that doesn't always look very kindly upon all its members. So, all people are not born equal. Unfortunately, some are born more equal than others. So, in higher education, students and faculty face great bias and discrimination during academic journeys. If you look at the numbers, again, significant number of dropouts and faculty from marginalized groups. Their self-esteem, their identity are all barriers to academic success. I was also looking at the University Grants Commission. It says India's universities, only 0.303% has ever had a female vice chancellor. 1,200 universities, only 0.03% has ever had a female vice chancellor. There have only been 4 women directors across the 73 institutes of national importance. Only 4 women directors. And there's a chronic clustering of women faculty in the lower ranks, temporary. So when you're getting temporary lecturers, temporary faculty, then the rate of women is much more. When you're getting tenured positions and you're getting permanent jobs, then it's men versus women, a ratio of 9:1. That's how bad it is. In India, less than 2% of higher education institutions are disabled friendly. Physically accessible campuses, integrated technologies are the need of the hour. We need to increase budgetary allocation for disability within higher education on a completely emergency basis. So in short, this inclusive development is still elusive in India. We're far away from achieving our SDG 4 goals. We're not going to do it. The 2035 National Education Policy target is not going to be met. But is it all bad news? No, it's not. We're all sitting here. We're all sitting here, and when St. Francis was leaving in 1541 to come to India, Ignatius of Loyola used the Latin phrase, ite inflammate omnia, which means go set the world on fire.
Madam, we have 5 more minutes.
Yeah?
Before he set the fire.
Yeah. No, you said you're going to explode a bomb, so I thought that I may as well set a fire. So he says, go set the world on fire. So all of us sitting here today, the learning and the education that is imparted in places like Loyola, this is not some store of wealth that we have the right for our own consumption and for our comforts. It's not. It is something that is a legacy that we hold in trust, that we must pass on to as many people and to improve more. So whoever is sitting here, maybe one of you sitting here will devise ways where we can make education more accessible. Maybe we can go out here. I work in a rural, I represent a rural constituency where I have seen first generation learners, how difficult it is for them to come into even a small college in Karimpur or a small college in Krishnanagar. I think education and higher education going forward is something that all of us who have graduated from college and graduated from universities have a duty to be connected to for the rest of your life. If you've got a college education, it is your duty to ensure that 3 other people within your sphere of life, in your sphere, have access and the ability to make sure. I think that's what's very important. One of the other things is that I went to university in the US, I went to a liberal arts college where we were taught impossible is nothing. And one of the things that has stood me in very good stead with all the ups and downs that I've been through in the last few years in my political journey, especially in the last year, has been that training and that grounding from Mount Holyoke, which taught me that go where no one else will go and do what no one else will do. If you're trying to be one of the